The first question, it's actually more of a general question I'm going to ask Clara first. The question is really about differentiating yourself because getting into medical school is so competitive and there's so many people who apply. So my question is, was there something on your application that feel like made you sort of stand out or something that you tried to emphasize when you were applying and when you were interviewing?
Definitely. I think it's hard, so many people are applying to med school, so many people are doing the similar checkbox, activities like research, volunteering. So I think the way to stand out is just do what you're passionate about. It doesn't need to be what everyone else is doing, and it shouldn't be, what everyone else is doing or what you think med school admissions would want. Just do what you're passionate about, and that's what will help you stand out. So for me, specifically, I was really interested in business, learning more about healthcare startups, and I was involved in a student organization that was more towards, business students, finance and consulting, but I also had several other experiences along the business routes, but I combined that and, talked about why I thought it was important to have this business background as a future physician. So I feel like that really helped me stand out because it was also unique to me. I was passionate about it. And yeah.
And Megan, the next question is going to be for you a little bit about it's something that I saw pop up a few times, and it's about shadowing and really getting that sort of experience of seeing what it's like to be surrounded by doctors and the healthcare environment. So what was your experience like either looking for shadowing or clinical experiences, and what advice would you give to students who really want to see more of what being a doctor is like?
Okay, so shadowing, I remember used to be so daunting as a pre-med, and honestly, it still kind of is as a med student, just because as someone training to be a physician, you know that you're not there, you're not there yet, you don't have an MD, so you don't exactly have as many capabilities as a medical doctor would or a physician. And so you always kind of feel smaller whenever you're shadowing or looking for shadowing. But in my experience, I really enjoyed the experiences that I had, although I was a little nervous going into it because I'm like, what if I shadow for the first time and I find out that I actually don't like medicine and I'm gonna quit, So it's always something like that. Like you're worried that something is gonna draw you away from medicine, but there's also, something that will draw you towards medicine. And that's what I got from my first shadowing experience. He was a really good teacher and he taught me so much that it drew me so much closer to medicine. And that physician that I shadowed was actually like my next door neighbor's relative's doctor. And so I feel like that highlighted a lot about how much you kind of have to network in medicine. I think it's getting more and more important as the time goes by, like just making connections and finding opportunities through those connections.
Yeah, great answer. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I have a question here now for Sana, and it's going to be a question about choosing a major as an undergraduate. So is there a major that you think is like the most helpful for somebody to major in? Can somebody major in anything? What was your major and how did you decide on that?
Yeah, you can major in absolutely anything. And I have classmates who majored in arts, in comp sci, in bio, in history, whatever it might be. If anything, having a quote unquote unique major may make you a more unique applicant. So truly do whatever makes you happy. I think my major was public health, or it was specifically health promotion and disease prevention at USC. And I absolutely loved it because it had a more public health focus. And we had some really cool classes we could take, like Eastern medicine and global health. And that's specifically why I chose my major. In addition to that, I think the reason a lot of people pick those sciencey majors like public health, like bio, like neuroscience is because your prerequisites are kind of included in it. Like for medical school, you need to take bio 1 and bio 2. And in a biology degree, you also need to take bio 1 and bio 2. So I think it does make it a little easier to plan. However, I think it's very manageable, especially with how easy it is to get a major and a minor nowadays, to do a completely separate major like business and find time to get all of your prerequisites in throughout all 4 years of undergraduate. I think all it requires is talking to someone, making a plan ahead of time, and making sure you know how to fit all of your prereqs in. But yeah, I have a great example. Actually, I have a classmate who did computer science in his undergrad, and then worked as a computer scientist for 2 years during his gap year. And he honestly was able to make a lot of money, save up for medical school, and is now really interested in radiology, which has a lot of applications to comp sci. So do whatever makes you happy. And yeah, I actually just don't think majors are a super big deal and will not determine whether or not you get into medical school.
Right, because as long as you're really meeting the requirements for those science courses and the courses that are required, like you said, do what you love. It is still college. It's still an opportunity to learn. So that's awesome. I have a question for you, Misha. That would be next, and it's a little bit about what I would say is one of the more daunting parts of applying. I remember I struggled with this, and it has to do with the personal statement. So when you were applying, right, how did you get across your message in pretty much like one page in your personal statement, and how did you try to stand out with that?
Yeah, so I feel like personal statement is probably one of the most daunting things for all pre-meds, because like, what do I write about, right? I talk about everything. I would focus on something personal within your life that's not related to the stats, like your research, your shadowing hours, your whatever clubs that you were in. Unless there was something that was really meaningful for you, at least the approach that I took for my personal statement was kind of talking about my first spark, my first interest in medicine. And just a little quick backstory for you guys. My grandpa was a physician in Iran. And so I actually had the opportunity to actually go around and, see patients and kind of shadow him in his workplace when I was young. So that was kind of like my first exposure to medicine and what really sparked my interest and my love for the field. So that's something that I really focused on. I wanted to get whoever was reading my personal statement, I wanted them to be connected to me and my story as far as how I fell in love with medicine and why that made me want to become a doctor. So the personal statement, I think a really great step is to get personal with it. Go and really reflect on, why do you want to become a physician? Because everybody has a different and unique story. Maybe it didn't start for you until you were in college and you got some clinical experience, or maybe you were like me and you got your first exposure to medicine really early. I think the best thing is to, again, focus on your why. Like, why do you want to become a doctor? It's not because you want to help people, right? We all say, oh, we want to help people, but you can help people in so many ways. You really, in your personal statement, I think, focus on why medicine. Why a doctor? And again, like for me, I just love getting personal with it and giving people a glimpse into my past, something that wasn't on my resume at all, right? So I think those are the steps that I took and got me into a couple of medical schools.
Nice. And what you said about not just rehashing your CV essentially and your activities in your personal statement, it's so true, because like we heard from the deans, an hour or so ago, that you want to bring a fresh perspective from your CV essentially. It shouldn't just be rewording of what you've done. It should be about how you made the decision really and what drives you. So really great answer. And to keep going through questions, then the next one's going to be for Clara, and it's a question about leadership. Some people have asked about that, and the deans even talked about a little bit earlier, but what were some of the ways that you expressed your leadership qualities, your abilities to do sort of projects and push teams forward? Because as a physician, you're the leader of the healthcare team. So how did you convey your leadership experience to medical school admissions committees?
Definitely. I would say my main involvement that I used to demonstrate leadership was my involvement in the consulting organization I was a part of. I joined my freshman year just as a member, and then I joined the executive board and also became one of the co-chairs of that organization my junior and senior year. So I used that experience to show not only my leadership, emphasizing how much we grew, what I was able to do during my 4 years. And also, I think it's important to show, you're committed and being involved in an activity for a long period of time, as opposed to, switching between different activities like every couple months or every year. So I think showing that long-term involvement in addition to the leadership really helped. And I used that experience as an example for leadership.
Great. And I'm seeing a question in the chat here in the Q&A about the MCAT, and we just heard a whole hour-long session about the MCAT and how important it is, because it really is sort of the main foundations of your application. So someone asks a question about that, and I'm going to direct it to Sana. And the question is, what's your biggest advice for preparing for the MCAT? It is an overwhelming process. You know, the score does really matter. It's one of the foundations. How did you prepare for the MCAT, and what advice would you give specifically for that?
Yeah, great question. So first thing with the MCAT is deciding when you're going to take it, and that requires understanding when you're going to apply. So when I was taking the MCAT, I took it right after my junior year of college. So I studied from May to August, and I took it in August. I got to go through senior year. I'm like forgetting the app cycle, write all my essays, apply, and that meant I took a gap year before medical school. And I took 2 months at first, and then I had to push back by 1 month because I just thought I needed more time. Generally, some advice I would give for the MCAT is really definitely use the AAMC materials. I know that the MCAT is a big investment, but those are the materials that you 100% should invest in because it's stuff directly from the people who make the exam. And I would really highly recommend looking for free resources at the same time. So there is Anki, which you can do for psych and soc, which I think is the greatest use of Anki for the MCAT. And I would say really don't focus all your time on review. I really struggled to like read a book and try to just absorb and via osmosis just like take in all that information. So I wish I did a little bit of review and then jumped into practice questions. And every time I didn't know something on a practice question, I'm like, look, here is a gap in my knowledge. And now I'm going to go look for a book or a video that can answer my question. And I think that happens a lot in medical school too. It's a lot less about like, let me read through every single book. It's more like, let me put my brain to work, try to answer questions and learn things in the process. And then the last piece of advice I'll give about the MCAT is really, really try to simulate your MCAT test taking environment. I wore the same sweater every single time I took the MCAT. I listened to the same song in the car right before I took every single practice MCAT. I ate the same exact snacks. And I think when I got to my MCAT testing site, I was like locked in because I knew exactly what to expect. So I would recommend all of that.
The next question is going to be for Clara, and it's a little bit more about sort of that experience before applying and getting clinical experience and sort of seeing what medical school is going to be like, seeing what residency is going to be like. How did you go about deciding that, you know, this is something that you want to do? What were some of your experiences that showed that?
Definitely. I would say there's a lot of things that I didn't know before I started medical school, and it's really hard. I think now that social media is a lot bigger, people post day in my life as a resident or a medical student, it makes it more, you know, it makes it easier for pre-meds to see maybe what it's like to be a resident and medical student and the realities, both the pros and cons. So for me, I feel like the way I went about that was shadowing, like some of the other panelists have said, and also talking to current medical students, talking to physicians who I shadowed, getting their take as well. And I think also for me, it wasn't necessarily just being a physician. For me, it was like bigger picture. I wanted to be part of improving our healthcare system. And for me, and I also wanted to have direct patient interactions. I think one of my volunteer experiences also helped me realize this when I volunteered at a student health clinic, interacting directly with patients and volunteering as a hospice. I enjoyed being in the hospital. I enjoyed talking to patients. So both the combination of the patient interaction and wanting to improve our healthcare system in a bigger capacity was my motivation.
I love it. I love that. Yeah. And so we talked a little bit about that, but also there are these like, we talked a little bit about checkboxes, and some of the deans, you know, they mention that it's important not to do your application through checkboxes, right? You should do things that you're passionate about. And one of the things that I feel like students don't often like to do is, or maybe some do, but research. And they feel like research is this like really, you know, daunting thing. So Sana, I'm going to ask you, did you do research? And if you did, what was it about, or how did you convey it? And if you didn't, how do you feel like that was, you know, taken on your application?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's one of the biggest anxieties a lot of pre-meds have about medical school apps because research is daunting. And even as a medical student doing research, I barely know what's going on. So it is a confusing process and it is a hard field to tap into. I did have research. I actually was a transfer student. So I went to the University of Michigan for a year and a half, and then I transferred to USC. And so when I got into Michigan, I immediately joined a research program there, and I did a little bit of research. And actually, that's one of those things I didn't even put on my application. And that's just to show that, like, if something is not meaningful to you, you don't need to put it on your application. And then when I went to USC, I joined a research lab regarding pancreatic cancer and essentially building organoids, which are 3D models of tumors, putting a little bit of chemotherapy into it and seeing how those 3D models of tumors would react. And the reason that research experience was so impactful for me was because I had a good mentor. And that's something that I will tell every single person who wants to go into research. Do not have a scarcity mindset. Don't say yes to every opportunity just because you think another one is not going to come up. I sent so many cold emails. I asked for a 10-minute phone call with every physician I emailed, and I made sure I was genuinely interested in their project. When I got on a call with them, I made sure that they were genuinely interested in mentoring me, and I asked what they could bring to the table to help me out. And my specific mentor, I told him, I want to make sure I can present something at a conference. I want to make sure I can get involved with writing a manuscript. And he was able to, throughout my 2 years there, guide me through the process and write me a great letter of recommendation. So though I didn't even talk about research very much in my interviews, just because it didn't come up very much, I was super passionate about it. And I think I got a great letter of rec and experience from it.
Yeah, and being able to talk passionately about your experiences is such a critical piece of it because it's not just about doing things, it's about conveying what that meant to you and what you learned from it. And you touched on something else as well, which is letters of recommendation. So I'm going to ask Megan. Megan, when you were applying, how did you go about collecting letters of recommendation? Who did you ask? How did you ask? And then what advice would you give for someone who, maybe sitting here with no letters of recommendation, but wanting to apply in the next year or two? And, what would you tell them about getting letters of rec?
This was also something that I struggled a lot with because I went to a really large undergrad. And so, starting out in biology and chemistry, there's like 500 other students. And I wasn't in office hours all the time because genuinely there was like 50 kids that went to office hours. And that just wasn't the environment that worked for me. And so I mainly looked into research mentors that I had. So it's like what Sana said, if you're in a research lab or doing research, make sure to like do well there, like show that you have a good work ethic and that you're efficient and really build your relationship with the people in that lab. So that's one way that you could find a letter of rec. Another way that I got a letter of rec was I reached out to one of the physicians that I shadowed. So if you do get really close with the physicians you shadow and you build a relationship with them over time, then this is something that you can do. The physician that I shadowed, he was in my hometown. And so whenever I would visit during like spring break or winter break, I would be like, hey, can I stop by the clinic and just say, hey, and he would just let me shadow him, follow him around for like an hour or two there. And we'd just catch up. So that was kind of also a long-term relationship that I maintained over time. Other than that, then you kind of want to really start to focus on finding letters of recommendation from professors that you're taking upper level classes in, like towards the latter part of your college career, because those classes are smaller and I think it's easier to really showcase your interest in that class or any curiosity. So I was in a data science class. I took a lot of like stats and CS courses, and I would show up to the office hours because if you guys know, coding is very hard. I don't know if anyone has experience with that in the audience, but it's really hard. And so you have to go to office hours a lot for that. And so my professor obviously like knew me because I would participate in class over Zoom, but I would also go to office hours. And eventually I emailed her to ask her about meeting to talk about her career path. And I kind of expressed just interest in the intersection between data science and medicine because, I was pre-med. So I wanted to kind of make it obvious that I was interested in something, but I didn't want to just like pretend that I was interested in something. So I wanted something genuine to actually meet with her about. So I think I did that like once or twice and kind of just continued being a good student in her class. And then eventually I asked her for a letter of rec. And I think depending on the nature of your relationship, you can ask over email or in person. I think I asked over email if like I genuinely couldn't reach the person that I was asking, because I also asked a high school teacher that I had, and that was like a very long-term good relationship that I had. So I don't think you have to ask in person or request a letter in person. But yeah, those are just some ways that I got my letters.
And the next one I see is for Sana, who has been answering questions about this actually in the chat, but it's about the interview process. There are different kinds of interviews. There's standard interviews, there's MMIs. What was your interview process like for medical school? What are the different types of interview formats, and how would you suggest people prepare for them?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, interviews are a little bit daunting, but I think when you get to the interview stage, that means that you've done something right. And so that's when it seems as though schools really want to get to know who you are. So just for full transparency, the schools that I got interviews at were the University of Miami Medical School, Rush Medical College, George Washington, and UC Irvine, and not one of those schools had an MMI. And so I really can't speak to what an MMI is, but generally it seems as though they give you some cases, like an ethical case, and they'll give you like a minute or two to answer it, and then they'll give you a few more of those, and they want to see how you respond on the spot. Most of my interviews were traditional interview style, which is where I'm just sitting and I'm chatting with you, and they have a chance to ask you questions, and at the end you have a chance to ask them questions. And for those, it was either with a student or a faculty member. So not only did I speak to doctors, but I also, for UC Irvine, spoke to a first-year medical student. And I think I am now an interviewer for UC Irvine, and I love to meet pre-meds. And what I'm interviewing people, what I look for is like genuine passion. And if you're going to tell me your whole story, and I know it's kind of hard to like tell your story to someone you just met, but just know that like we're trying to understand who you are, what you want to do as a physician, and why you're here. And it's just kind of important to put all those cards out on the table. Let's see. And I think when you're preparing for medical school interviews, my first recommendation, I will rarely recommend this, but go to Student Doctor Network and search up what, like, the school will have an interview page where students who have previously interviewed will write what was asked of them. I would practice those exact questions, because for some of the schools, not naming schools, some of the questions were exactly the same. And then I would make sure to definitely do a mock interview, whether that's with someone, I know that's expensive, or by yourself. You just take a video of yourself talking and you listen to it back, because you're not used to hearing your voice, and you might have some weird quips that you don't realize until you hear it. So I had to do this a lot. I took a lot of videos of myself talking and answering questions while I was driving to work. I would do a little voice memo, and I realized that I said like a lot, and I really wanted to cut that out. And when I took videos of myself, I realized I tilted my head to this side a lot, which I wanted to cut out. So that would generally be my advice. And if you're able to, just see if you can contact a medical student at that school and have them ask questions to you, and truly learn why you want to go to that school, because that passion is very evident when people interview for UC Irvine, whether or not they did research into the school. So yeah, do your research and be yourself. They're going to love you.
Perfect. Yeah, that interview is so important, because it's not just about getting to the interview, but it's also about really showcasing who you are during it, whether it's the MMI format, whether it's the standard interview. And also, you mentioned UC Irvine. Last year, when we did the Premed Experience 2023, one of our dean's panelists was actually one of the deans at UC Irvine, who is Dr. Megan Boysen Osborne. So great little connection right there. But really, kind of showing who you are is more than just about rehashing your activities. It's really about expressing to the interviewer all about yourself and why you want to become a physician. But we have time for this one last question that I want everybody to answer to. So we'll, in about a minute or less, I'm going to ask each one of you, starting with Misha. For someone who's sitting here watching, what is the single biggest takeaway that you want to give to somebody who's here right now, who's a pre-med, who wants to become a physician, who wants to be in your shoes in medical school? What's the biggest piece of advice in 1 minute or less? We're going to go through everybody, and that's the last question.
You got it. Okay. Don't give up. Do not give up. Even if you don't get in this cycle, even if you don't get in next cycle, it does not matter. Keep pushing at this. This is a hard process. The fact that you guys have taken the time out of your day to be here. You've put in so much energy into your education, and you're doing what needs to be done to get where we are. You will make it. So don't put unnecessary pressure on yourself. Just understand that your time is going to come, and keep pushing. Being a pre-med is one of the hardest parts, I will say. And you guys are doing excellent. The fact that you're here today is incredible, and I'm proud of each and every single one of you.
Great. Megan?
Okay, you said 1 minute and I felt so much pressure, but basically I think everyone's gonna hear this from, it's like the most basic piece of advice, but don't compare yourself to other people. Whenever I first started college, people were talking about volunteering at the nearby hospital, and I was like, okay, when did y'all even interview to get that spot? Like, I didn't even know there were applications for this. And so that was, it felt really weird starting college off like that, but I eventually got all my clinical stuff. I did perfectly fine. And same for medical school. When you get here, there's people going to be bragging about research, about shadowing, and, like, just block them all out, block out the haters, block out the non-haters, block out whoever, and just focus on yourself and your journey and what you yourself are interested in. Find your mentors, find your people, and you will be fine.
Thank you so much. Clara?
Yeah, this is all great advice. I was like trying to think of something different. But somebody commented this quote on one of my posts, and it was like, closed mouths don't get fed. And I really love the idea behind that. And I definitely think I utilize that many times throughout my pre-med journey, because I didn't have any physician connections at the time, and I always needed to reach out to other people for help and cold email. And same thing when you're applying to medical schools, and if you're waitlisted or if you haven't gotten an interview yet, send a letter of interest, tell the med schools that you're interested in them, and leverage your existing acceptances to maybe get scholarships at other schools. Like, the worst thing that people can do is either ignore you, like not see your email, or say no, and it can't hurt to ask. And definitely being able to reach out and put myself out there has helped me get to med school now.
Awesome. And now the last one is for Sana.
Wow, you guys said everything perfectly. I just want to reiterate that there are people that are rooting for you. We don't know you individually, but we're rooting for you. There are free resources out there. There are mentors out there. Please take advantage of that. You are doing so much and being such a go-getter by being on this panel today. You're being a go-getter with every email that you send, even if someone doesn't respond. And I think that this med school app journey is so hard. When it's hard, remind yourself that it's supposed to be hard. You're not supposed to be handling it perfectly. It's not going to be easy. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah, we're just all really proud and excited of you. So keep doing your thing, keep showing up, and tell your story authentically. And whatever brought you to medicine is what's meant to get you into medicine.
Those were such fantastic answers. This was clearly so helpful. We really want to thank all the panelists for being on today, for taking time out of your weekend to help answer direct questions. We got through so many questions. Obviously, everyone is going to be following you on social media and asking more. This was just an incredible, incredible panel. Thank you all so much.